never thought I'd be afraid of children. That changed on my first Halloween in the house on Cedar Grove Lane, when I learned that some trick-or-treaters don't come for candy. They come for you. Even now, months later, my hands shake as I type this account, hoping that sharing my story might help someone else, or at least help me maintain what's left of my sanity. I'd moved to the suburbs of Massachusetts just 2 weeks before Halloween, seeking the quiet life after years in Boston's bustling downtown. The colonial-style house with its weathered red shutters and wraparound porch seemed perfect. Spacious yet cozy, set back from the road behind mature maple trees. The real estate agent had seemed almost desperate to sell, dropping the price twice before I finally signed. Her relief when I took the keys should have been my first warning. Now I wonder if she knew something I didn't. That evening started normally enough. The October air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys. I'd spent the afternoon arranging plastic skeletons and fake cobwebs on my porch, alongside a bowl of full-size candy bars, trying to make a good impression on my new neighbors. As dusk approached, I settled into my grandfather's old leather armchair by the bay window, laptop open to catch up on work while waiting for the neighborhood kids to start their rounds. At exactly 6:13 p.m., I remember checking my phone. I noticed them through my living room window. 5 children standing perfectly still on the sidewalk in front of my house, their faces turned toward my window. They wore old-fashioned Halloween costumes that looked too authentic to be store-bought. A witch in a tattered black dress with detailed embroidery, a skeleton in what appeared to be hand-painted white fabric, a ghost in flowing gray silk that somehow didn't move in the wind, a pumpkin with intricate vine work that seemed to shift in the growing darkness, and what looked like a plague doctor, complete with a leather mask and glass eyes that reflected the streetlight with an unnatural gleam. I waited for them to walk up to my door, but they didn't move. They just stood there, staring. Their eyes caught the streetlight with an otherworldly glow, like cat's eyes in the dark, but somehow worse. Deeper, older, hungrier. I told myself they were just regular kids being creepy on Halloween. Isn't that what the holiday is about? But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The way they stood, too still to be human, too perfectly aligned like pieces on a chessboard. When I opened my front door, none of them approached. No cheerful cries of trick or treat, no rustling of candy bags. Just silence. The temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees, and my breath came out in visible puffs despite the mild autumn weather. The porch lights flickered, though I'd just changed the bulbs that morning. "Hey there," I called out, trying to sound cheerful while fighting the urge to slam the door. "Would you like some candy?" They remained motionless. That's when I noticed something else. No parents watching from the street. No other trick-or-treaters in sight. The normally busy suburban street had gone completely silent, as if someone had thrown a heavy blanket over the entire neighborhood. Even the distant sound of traffic had ceased. I went back inside, hoping they'd leave. Through the window, I watched them for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When I checked my phone again, the screen was black and wouldn't turn on. My laptop had died too, despite being plugged in. The digital clock on my microwave flashed random numbers before going dark. The next time I looked up, they had moved closer. Now standing at the foot of my driveway, I hadn't seen them move. I hadn't heard footsteps. They were simply closer. My heart began to race as I realized no other trick-or-treaters had come by. The street remained empty, though I could hear distant laughter and music from other parts of the neighborhood, as if normal life continued just beyond some invisible barrier. I drew the curtains and retreated to my kitchen, but curiosity forced me to peek again. They stood at the bottom of my porch steps now, their heads tilted at identical angles. The plague doctor's mask seemed to follow my movement, its glass eyes reflecting impossible colors. The witch's fingers, which I could now see clearly, were too long and jointed in the wrong places. The skeleton's costume didn't move with breathing. My phone suddenly sparked to life with a notification sound that made me jump. The screen glowed with an intensity that hurt my eyes, displaying 5 new text messages from unknown numbers. Each contained the same words.
"Let us in. We've been waiting so long."
As I watched, more messages appeared.
"We've always been here. This was our home first. Join our parade."
I ran upstairs, away from the windows, and huddled in my bedroom. The house grew colder with each passing minute until frost formed on the inside of the windows. Through the heating vents came whispers, too faint to understand but clearly children's voices. They spoke in unison, their words just beyond comprehension, in a language that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Around midnight, everything stopped. The whispers ceased. The cold dissipated. When I finally gathered the courage to look outside, the street was normal again. Kids and parents were walking home from their trick-or-treating, laughing and comparing their candy hauls. My electronics worked perfectly, showing no sign of the earlier disruption. I convinced myself it had been a Halloween prank, an elaborate scheme by local teenagers. That is, until I checked my security cameras the next morning. The footage showed an empty sidewalk all evening. But in every frame where I knew they had been standing, there were 5 small shadows on the ground. Shadows that didn't match any physical objects, shadows that sometimes moved against the light. I still live in that house. I don't have much choice. No one will buy it. Every Halloween I leave town now. But sometimes on random nights throughout the year, I'll wake up to find my phone displaying the same message from unknown numbers.
"We're still waiting."
The messages come at 6:13 p.m. every time. The worst part, I've started seeing them in my neighborhood at twilight, standing in front of other houses. They're always perfectly still, always staring up at windows. And every time I see them, there's a new child in their group, wearing an old-fashioned costume, waiting silently with the others. Last week I counted 9. I never found out what they wanted that night. Part of me hopes I never will. But whenever I see a for sale sign go up in my neighborhood, I want to warn the new families. Some trick-or-treaters don't come for candy. And once they've chosen your house, they never really leave. They just keep waiting, their parade growing longer, until someone finally lets them in. I've never told anyone about that Halloween night in 1994. Not because I thought they wouldn't believe me, though they probably wouldn't, but because speaking about it would make it real. Would acknowledge that somewhere out there he might still be waiting behind another door, wearing that same knowing smile that haunted my childhood dreams. I was 11 that year, and it was my first time trick-or-treating alone. Mom didn't want me to go at all. It had only been 2 months since Sarah's accident, but I insisted. Sarah would have wanted me to go, I said. She loved Halloween. What I didn't tell Mom was that I needed to escape the suffocating silence of our house, the empty bedroom across the hall, the way Mom's eyes would well up every time she passed Sarah's school photo in the hallway. The house had become a museum of grief, each room preserved exactly as it was the day we lost her. The evening started normally enough. Our suburban neighborhood was decorated with the usual plastic skeletons and cotton cobwebs. Jack-o'-lanterns flickered on every porch, their warm light barely reaching the sidewalk. Children's laughter echoed from somewhere distant, carried on the cool October breeze. I remember adjusting my plastic superhero mask, gathering my courage, and walking up to the first house on Maple Drive. The porch steps creaked under my feet, an ordinary sound that would soon become ominous. The door opened, and there he stood, tall and thin, with perfectly combed gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that caught the porch light. His smile was gentle, almost sympathetic, like he knew something I didn't. His suit was impeccable, though oddly old-fashioned, like something from a black and white photograph. "Trick or treat," I mumbled, and he dropped a full-size candy bar into my bag. Nothing strange about that. Nothing strange at all, until I reached the second house. The same man opened the door. Same gray hair, same glasses, same gentle smile. Even the suit was identical, down to the slightly crooked tie pin. I froze, my trick-or-treat dying in my throat. He must have noticed my confusion because his smile widened slightly. "Sometimes things aren't what they seem," he said softly, dropping another candy bar into my bag. "Sarah understood that, didn't she?" I stumbled backward, nearly falling off the porch. How did he know my sister's name? The plastic mask suddenly felt suffocating, and my hands trembled as I ran to the next house, heart pounding, telling myself it was impossible. It had to be a coincidence. Maybe they were twins. Maybe I was seeing things. Maybe grief was finally making me lose my mind, just like Mom had when she spent 3 days setting Sarah's place at the dinner table after the funeral. But there he was again, and again, and again. Each house, the same man. Each time, his smile grew more knowing, his comments more personal. "That's a nice costume. Better than the ghost costume you wore last year. Your sister would have loved to be here tonight. Remember what she told you that last morning?" The street seemed to stretch endlessly, though I knew our cul-de-sac had only 12 houses. The other trick-or-treaters had vanished, leaving me alone with the echo of my footsteps and the rustling of dead leaves. I wanted to run home, but something kept me moving down the street. Maybe it was the need to prove I was imagining things. Maybe it was because each time he mentioned Sarah, it felt like keeping a part of her alive. Or maybe it was because deep down, I knew he was leading me to something I needed to face. The street lights began to flicker, casting strange shadows that seemed to dance at the edge of my vision. The last house on the cul-de-sac was dark. No decorations, no porch light, no sign of life. The windows were black holes against the weathered siding, and the garden was overgrown with weeds that whispered in the wind. Yet my feet carried me to the door. I didn't even need to knock. He was already there, waiting. But this time, his smile was different. Sad. Understanding. The porch light suddenly buzzed to life, illuminating his face in harsh fluorescent clarity. "She told you it wasn't your fault," he said quietly. "That last morning when you fought about the bike, she told you it wasn't your fault, but you never believed her, did you? The guilt has been eating at you. Thomas. Just like that candy bar wrapper you hid under your bed. The one from her secret stash that you took after she died. You thought it would make you feel closer to her, but it only made the guilt worse." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had never told anyone about that morning. About how I'd refused to let Sarah borrow my new bike. About how she'd taken her old one instead, the one with the faulty brakes. About her last words to me. "It's okay, Tommy. I'm not mad. It's not your fault." And the candy wrapper. How could he possibly know about that? I still had it in my dresser drawer, hidden beneath my socks. I don't remember running home. I don't remember much of anything after that moment. When I told Mom I wasn't feeling well, she assumed it was grief. Maybe it was. The candy bars in my bag were real enough, though. All full size, all the same brand. All with the same expiration date. The day Sarah died. 30 years have passed since that night. I'm a father now, with children of my own who go trick-or-treating. Sometimes when I'm driving through an unfamiliar neighborhood, I catch a glimpse of someone in a doorway. Tall, thin, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. The sight always makes my heart skip a beat. But I never stop to check if it's him. Once, my daughter asked why I always keep a candy bar from her sister's favorite brand in my desk drawer. I told her it's a reminder that some things can't be explained, only accepted. I've come to believe that whatever happened that Halloween night was meant to help me let go of my guilt. Sarah's accident wasn't my fault. Deep down, I think I always knew that. But sometimes we need to hear the truth from the most unexpected sources to finally believe it. What I've never been able to explain is why, every Halloween since then, I find a single candy bar on my front porch. The same brand, always with an expiration date from decades ago. Still, every Halloween, I make sure to answer my own door, just in case he's out there, moving from house to house, finding other children who need to hear something they've kept buried deep inside. And if you're trick-or-treating in my neighborhood and see a tall, thin man with gray hair at every door, maybe he has something you need to hear too. Just be prepared. He might know more about you than you're ready to face. I keep checking my rearview mirror, but it doesn't help. The woman is still there, standing in the middle of the road every time I loop back around. Her eyes are what I noticed first, pale and luminescent, like frozen moons floating in the pre-dawn darkness. I've passed her 7 times now. Each time she's been closer to my car. Each time more wrong. This wasn't how my fresh start was supposed to begin. The desert highway stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the Nevada wilderness. My '89 Corolla's headlights barely penetrated the darkness, but I pressed on. The radio had died 2 hours ago, leaving me alone with the rhythmic hum of worn tires against pavement and the occasional ping of my engine cooling system. Sounds that had become uncomfortably familiar over the past 6 hours of driving. The job interview was in Henderson at 9 a.m., my ticket out of 3 years of dead-end retail work in Sacramento. I couldn't afford to stop, even when my GPS lost signal 2 hours ago. The desert at night is different from anything I'd experienced before. The darkness feels absolute, pressing against the windows like a living thing. The moon hung low and bloated on the horizon, casting strange shadows across the landscape. Rusty signs and twisted Joshua trees threw distorted shapes onto the road, making me flinch more times than I'd care to admit. The temperature gauge on my dashboard showed 42 degrees. A typical desert night, dropping steadily as dawn approached. The first time I saw her, I almost missed her entirely. Just a dark shape at the edge of my headlight's reach, arm outstretched in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. I slowed, instinctively, but something about her stillness made me press the gas instead. A coyote's distant howl echoed across the empty landscape, and I remembered every warning I'd ever heard about stopping for strangers on desert highways. The desert plays tricks on your eyes, I told myself. Especially at 4 a.m. 10 minutes later, I saw her again. Same pose, same spot. Impossible, given how far I'd driven. But now I could see those eyes, reflecting the pale light like a cat's. They seemed to float in the darkness, independent of any face or form. I accelerated hard, hands tight on the steering wheel, heart pounding against my ribs. The old Toyota's engine whined in protest as I pushed it past 80, then 90. The third time, I noticed her dress. A simple white sundress, torn at the hem, swaying gently despite the dead calm air. The fourth time, I saw the dark stains spreading across its fabric, like water seeping through cloth. Except water doesn't move against gravity. The fifth time, I realized the stains were moving, crawling up the fabric like spilled ink in reverse. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. Each time I pass, the road signs showed the same destinations, the same distances. Las Vegas 147 miles, Henderson 165 miles. Each time my phone's screen shows 4:27 a.m., no signal bars. Each time she's 3 feet closer to where my car will pass. The air gets colder with each loop until I can see my breath fogging the windshield despite the heater running full blast. On the 6th loop, I tried turning around. I pulled a sharp U-turn, tires screeching against the asphalt, and drove back the way I came. The road curved gently through the desert, passing the same landmarks. A fallen billboard advertising a long-closed casino, a cluster of wind-twisted trees, a rusted-out truck slowly being reclaimed by the sand. 20 minutes of driving led me right back to her. She was facing the wrong direction now, her head turned 180 degrees to watch me approach. The dark stains had reached her neck, pulsing like veins filled with oil. My fuel gauge hasn't moved since this began, stuck at half a tank. The temperature gauge stays steady. Even the dust on my windshield remains unchanged, the same dead insects frozen in place. The only constants in this loop are the growing wrongness of the woman and the shrinking distance between us. Time feels thick here, like moving through syrup. Each loop takes exactly 10 minutes, though it feels both longer and shorter. This is the 7th loop. I can see her clearly now. The way her joints bend at impossible angles, the unnatural smoothness of her movements as she turns to track my car. The stains have reached her face, spreading out from her luminescent eyes like tears of tar. Her mouth moves as I pass, forming words I can't hear through the closed windows, but I can feel them. A vibration in my teeth, a pressure in my skull that makes my vision blur. I know what happens if I stop. I know it as surely as I know that this road no longer leads anywhere except back to her. But my options are running out. The space between us has shortened to inches, and I swear I can hear whispers cutting through the engine noise now. They sound like apologies, like warnings, like a voice I should remember but can't quite place. The desert around me has changed too. The moonlight seems to bend wrong, casting shadows that move independently of their sources. The Joshua trees have turned their branches to watch me pass, and the sand beneath them ripples like water. Even the stars above look different. Too close, too bright, arranged in patterns that hurt my eyes if I look at them too long. This will be my last loop. The next time I see her, there won't be enough room to pass. I've turned off the engine, here in the darkness between loops. The silence is deafening. My headlights illuminate nothing but empty road ahead, and I'm writing this on my phone's notes app while I still can. I don't know if anyone will find it. The road signs are changing for the first time. Now they all point toward a place called home. I can see her silhouette forming in my rearview mirror, those pale eyes growing brighter. She's walking toward my car, her movements jerky like a damaged film reel. Each step brings another memory flooding back. The sound of screeching tires, the flash of oncoming headlights, the sickening crunch of metal meeting metal. I understand now. She isn't a hitchhiker looking for a ride. She's death, and she's been trying to warn me that I never survived the first loop. It started as a shortcut, a quiet path cutting through the woods on Halloween night. But with each step, the silence around me seemed to stir, and soon the trees echoed with voices only I could hear. They weren't strangers' voices. They were my secrets, whispered back at me in words I'd never said out loud. I took that forest path on impulse. Halloween had a way of warping things just enough to feel daring. My friends always warned me about the woods at night, but they didn't understand. There was no thrill in sticking to well-lit streets. I just wanted the rush, the alone time, that lingering unease. But halfway through, the air grew thick, and the crunch of leaves underfoot became muffled, swallowed up by the dark. Then, out of nowhere, I heard them, whispering. A murmur of voices drifting through the pines. At first, I assumed it was other people, some late-night campers or maybe kids like me, testing their nerves. But the longer I walked, the more I realized these weren't random voices. They were familiar, speaking with a strange, muted clarity, as if the trees themselves knew who I was. My own voice floated out from the shadows, low and almost mocking.
Remember that time you told yourself no one would find out?
I froze. It was a private memory, something small but humiliating. A time I'd lied to save face. My chest tightened as the voice continued, picking at things I hadn't thought about in years.
Everyone knew. They just didn't say anything.
Another voice murmured, a low, taunting drawl. The trees seemed to lean in, listening, pressing closer. I wanted to turn around, but something in me kept moving forward, as if the whispers were pulling me in. Each step, the shadows grew darker, thicker, and the path behind me seemed to vanish into mist. Faces appeared between the trees, some partially hidden, others watching me openly. They were twisted and stretched in ways that felt just slightly wrong. People I knew, or maybe had known. There was my mother, but her eyes were too large, her mouth curled in a bitter smile. My old best friend, but his skin looked waxy, his eyes a little too vacant. They blinked, and for an instant, their faces blurred, turning into other faces. People I barely remembered, but couldn't shake, like a friend I'd wronged or a teacher I'd resented. The voices picked up again, listing secrets I thought I'd buried.
She only pretended to care about you. You know that, right?
One murmured from my left. Another figure stepped forward, their face half hidden by the shadows, eyes hollow.
He never forgave you.
It whispered, the words slipping into my mind as smoothly as a thought. I felt coldness creep up my spine, the familiar, aching guilt I'd tried to ignore resurfacing in every step. I stumbled, my foot catching on an unseen root, and I looked up to see them all staring. Dozens of faces from every chapter of my life, slightly distorted, hauntingly familiar, and all of them were watching, waiting, as if they'd been following me for years, hiding in the shadows of my mind. I turned to run, but the path twisted and the trees closed in, blocking every way out. Their voices rose, a churning whisper of accusations and secrets, filling the forest with words I'd never told a soul.
Everyone knew about you.
One voice spat.
No one really cared,
Hissed another. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. They were inside my head now, pulsing with every heartbeat. I thought about my own lies, the mistakes, the things I'd hidden so deeply I'd almost convinced myself they didn't matter. But the forest knew. Somehow the forest knew. Panic clawed at me. I turned blindly, pushing through thorny branches and thick undergrowth, my breath catching as familiar faces flickered out of sight, melting back into the shadows. The whispers followed, growing louder, taunting me, cornering me. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take another step, I stumbled forward, rolling down a slope, the wet earth pulling me away from the trees. I crashed against a fallen log, gasping, the forest looming dark and still behind me. For a long moment, there was only silence. I pulled myself up, breathing hard, glancing back toward the twisted pines. Nothing moved. The whispers had faded, and the path was gone, swallowed up by shadows. I made it home, shaking, and barely slept that night. I told myself it was over, that I'd left the voices in the forest where they belonged. But now, when I'm alone, late at night or in an empty room, I hear them again. Just faint whispers, rising up from the quiet. Sometimes it's my own voice, but sometimes it's theirs, calling me back, as if the forest's memory had seeped into my own. And now I can't help but wonder, did I ever really leave? If you're enjoying these chilling tales, don't forget to hit the like button. It lets us know you're ready for more stories that linger long after they're told. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to stay up to date with every new horror that creeps into the channel. Who knows? The next story might be closer to reality than you'd think. That night was darker than any Halloween I'd ever known. We weren't out to hunt ghosts or find trouble. We'd only heard about the lake on a whim, someone passing along a story. A warning that none of us took seriously. People said something was out there, something that didn't like to be watched. And on Halloween, if you got too close, it would drag you under. The lake was a 15-minute drive down a winding back road, hidden by thick trees that leaned in like they wanted to swallow the place whole. We pulled up, our voices the only sound as we crept through the underbrush to the edge of the water. It was colder than I expected, and somehow even more silent. No frogs or crickets, just the wind and our footsteps. At first, it was easy to shrug off the tension. A legend, we thought. A trick of moonlight on the water. But after a while, as we dared each other to approach the edge, we started feeling it. That hum in the air, that sense of being watched, like something was biding its time, waiting for us to draw closer. The water rippled, but there was nothing there. As we kept glancing back, something strange happened. Our laughter died, our voices softened. My friends whispered they felt like they were being watched from beneath. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling only grew worse. Then one of us, Drew, knelt down, squinting into the lake. His eyes were locked onto the water, and when I called his name, he didn't look away. That's when I saw the faintest flash of something in the lake. A shape that moved like it was drifting just below the surface. Drew said it looked like a pair of eyes, and then he was gone. As Drew crouched by the water's edge, he was completely transfixed. His eyes were wide, his face pale in the moonlight as he stared straight into the depths. I was about to nudge him, to tell him to stop messing around, when I saw it. A shimmer just beneath the surface, almost like a face. No, not a face, just eyes. Eyes that glowed faintly, reflecting the pale moonlight as they fixed on Drew. And as I stared, it felt like they turned toward me. Drew's breath hitched and I saw his hand start to tremble. I reached out to grab his shoulder, but then something happened that froze me in place. A pale shape, almost translucent, drifted up from the depths like a shadow in murky glass. It was long, slim, with limbs that bent in strange ways, as if it were stretching toward us from beneath. Its eyes were unnaturally large, too wide and too bright, locked on Drew. Before I could scream, a hand shot out of the water. I say hand, but it was almost skeletal, covered in thin, sickly-looking skin that stretched over jagged bones. It didn't make a splash. It just broke the surface, silent and deadly, reaching up and wrapping around Drew's wrist. He tried to scream, but the sound barely escaped his throat. His eyes widened as he was yanked forward, his foot slipping on the muddy bank. He struggled, his free hand clawing at the dirt, but it was no use. I watched, frozen, as Drew was dragged inch by inch into the water, the creature's grip unwavering, its ghastly face floating just below the surface, waiting. I shouted his name, but by then he was half submerged, and the water had turned black around him, like ink spilling from nowhere. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, I saw him lock eyes with me, his face twisted in terror. And then he was gone, pulled under so fast that the water was still within seconds, like he'd never been there at all. The silence that followed was suffocating, an unnatural stillness settling over the lake, as if it had swallowed Drew and sealed itself shut. The rest of us just stood there, barely able to breathe, staring at the place where he'd vanished. But in the dark water, I thought I saw it again. Those eyes lurking beneath, watching us with a hunger that felt ancient, cold. I can't say how long we stood there, staring at the water. Every nerve in my body told me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The others, Lucy and Carter, were as still as statues, eyes fixed on the dark lake, as if expecting Drew to resurface at any second. But deep down, we knew that wasn't going to happen. Whatever had taken him, it wasn't about to give him back. Carter broke the silence, his voice a thin, shaky whisper. We have to. We have to go. Now. He didn't have to tell me twice. My legs finally kicked into gear, and I turned, scrambling back up the path toward the trees. But then Lucy's hand shot out, grabbing my arm so hard it hurt. Her eyes were wide, frantic. We can't just leave him, she whispered. Her voice cracked, her expression pleading like she was hoping I'd have some answer, some plan to save Drew. But I had nothing. Lucy, I said, my voice barely steady. He's gone. We can't help him. She shook her head, her gaze darting back to the lake. And that's when I saw it again. The faint glow of those eyes, just barely visible beneath the surface, watching us with a cold, predatory patience. It was like the lake itself was staring back, waiting, savoring our fear. I tugged Lucy's arm, trying to get her to move. "We need to go now." But she wouldn't budge. She was staring at the water, her face slack, her eyes glazed. I realized with a chill that she looked just like Drew had before he'd been pulled under, like she was in some kind of trance. "Lucy," I shouted, louder this time. She blinked, and for a second I thought she'd snapped out of it. But then she took a step toward the lake, her hand slipping out of mine, as if pulled by some invisible force. "No," I whispered, feeling a sick dread clawing at my stomach. I grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. "Lucy, it's trying to get you too. Don't look at it. Please just don't look." Her eyes shifted back to me, dazed and unfocused, and for a moment I thought I'd gotten through to her. But then her gaze drifted back to the water, and she took another step forward, her movements slow, like she was sleepwalking. Behind me I heard Carter yell, "Let's go." And something in his voice broke the spell. I yanked Lucy backward, nearly dragging her as I stumbled up the path, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. We ran. Through the trees, over rocks and tangled roots, until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they might give out. I didn't dare look back, too terrified I'd see those eyes watching us from the dark. Finally, when we could run no more, we collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping for breath. Lucy's eyes were wide, her face pale, and she looked back the way we'd come, her expression haunted. Carter broke the silence. What was that thing?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I'd never forget those eyes, that sickly glow, the way they seemed to pierce right through me. I shuddered, trying to push the memory from my mind, but it clung to me, refusing to let go. I knew one thing, though. We weren't going back to that lake, and whatever waited beneath the surface, it was still out there, watching, waiting. I stumbled upon the book on an ordinary Wednesday. It wasn't like I'd been searching for anything particular, just browsing shelves in the dim back corner of the city's oldest library. The librarians called it the archives where books went to be forgotten. And that's where I saw it. Hidden between crumbling encyclopedias, its spine cracked and barely holding together. It didn't even have a title. I didn't know it then, but this book was going to change everything. When I opened it, the pages were worn and yellowed, filled with legends of a creature that supposedly haunted the dark woods at the edge of town. The monster was vaguely humanoid, but with sharp, elongated limbs and hollow eyes that, it was said, stared into your soul. Nothing too out of the ordinary for an old myth, but something about the description stuck with me. I read on, the atmosphere in the library turning heavy, and somehow expectant. The first time I closed the book, I almost felt compelled to leave it behind. But something held me there. The next time I opened it, I noticed the words had shifted. The legends had given way to something familiar, my own life. It started innocently enough. Descriptions of places I'd been to, like the small lake I used to visit with friends, or the house where I grew up. But then it dug deeper, recounting things no one else could know. Details from my past, my mistakes. Things that hadn't crossed my mind in years. I would close the book, glance around to make sure I was alone, and shove it back on the shelf. But each time I returned, it was as if it had been waiting, and the stories it told only became darker. Then, one night, as I was reading by the pale light filtering in from the library's few high windows, I saw a passage that made my blood run cold. I turned quickly, every nerve in my body alive with fear, but there was no one there. Nothing but the silence pressing down. It was as if the words had come to life, dragging shadows from the corners of my vision, breathing down my neck. I slammed the book shut, but I couldn't leave. My fingers, trembling, pried the cover open again, and this time the words seemed almost frantic. They began telling of events that hadn't happened yet, but with each visit to the library, each reopening of those yellowed pages, those future events would come to pass. At first, they were harmless predictions. A missed bus, an unexpected call from an old friend. But the stories grew darker, forecasting tragedies in places I knew I'd be, times I couldn't avoid. One day the book described a figure lurking by my window. I didn't believe it, of course, until later that night when I saw what looked like a shadowy shape standing just outside, faintly visible through the curtains. Heart pounding, I pulled them back and nothing but the empty street beyond. But from that point, I was never truly alone. No matter where I went, I felt the presence described in those pages. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses, a reflection in the glass, a shape at the edge of my vision, always vanishing when I looked directly. At work, my coworkers would glance at me with concern, noticing the way I'd snap my head toward the slightest sound, my eyes fixed on empty corners. I could feel my sanity slipping away, caught in the crosshairs of a watchful presence I couldn't see. I became a stranger in my own life, fearing places I used to love, growing paranoid over every dark corner. My nights were sleepless, haunted by the idea that it was only a matter of time before I'd see that figure clearly, up close. One evening, I found the final entry. Written in a scratchy hand, as though in haste, it described a fate too terrible to comprehend, an encounter I couldn't escape. I tried to tear my eyes from the words, but they only blurred, rearranged themselves, becoming more horrifying with each glance. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, my throat dry as I stumbled out of the library, abandoning the book on that forgotten shelf. But I felt it watching me even then, even after I'd left it behind. I haven't gone back in weeks, but my house is different now. Evenings stretch into a silence so heavy it feels like it's waiting for me to make the first move. When the lights flicker or a shadow shifts, I catch my breath, hoping this isn't the moment the figure finally reveals itself. Last night I heard it. Footsteps outside my window, the crunch of leaves underfoot. I held my breath, too terrified to look. The book's final line whispers in my mind, relentless. You know the ending. And yet, I'm not ready to see it. I should have known better than to cut through that field. It was Halloween, and the air was thick, almost sweet with the rot of damp leaves and mud, the kind of scent that clings to your skin long after you're indoors. I'd grown up near this abandoned farmland, 30 acres of sprawling weeds, broken fences and fields clawed back by the forest. Nobody came here anymore, but I was late and figured it was the fastest way back. The field sprawled out beneath the overcast sky like an unbroken sea, waves of bramble and tall grass whispering in the breeze. Not halfway across, something caught my eye. A shadow that moved at the very edge of my vision. I turned sharply, expecting maybe a tree or a trick of the light. But there was nothing, only the hollow field, the tangled silhouettes of weeds, and the distant tree line. Shaking it off, I quickened my pace, letting my gaze drift forward, only to feel that pull at my peripheral vision again. This time I barely looked, just enough to catch a shape lurking at the very edge of sight. My breath hitched. The air felt colder, and the breeze that had carried the soft sounds of rustling weeds seemed to die, leaving only silence. I forced myself to keep my eyes straight ahead, but that shape lingered, impossibly close. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. A play of shadows, nothing more. Only it wasn't. The longer I walked, the closer it seemed to be each time I looked, almost like it was drawing itself closer each time my gaze flicked away. When I finally dared to glance back fully, I caught just a glimpse, a blur of limbs, bending at angles no living thing should have. The sight sent a jolt of fear through me, an almost electric shock as something stirred in my memory. A vague tale, half forgotten, about a thing that haunted these fields. Back when I was a kid, the older folks would talk about it sometimes, but always in hushed voices, and I dismissed it as nothing more than a story. A figure, they'd say, that watched from the weeds, getting closer every time you looked away. I hadn't thought of it in years. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. I could feel it. A shadow, edging closer each time I tried to ignore it, hiding just beyond sight. The shape seemed to grow more distinct, darker against the pale, dying grass. And though I tried to convince myself otherwise, the feeling that it was watching me grew stronger with each step. The wind picked up, carrying a low hum through the trees as if they, too, sensed something wrong. My chest tightened, and every instinct screamed to break into a sprint. But some irrational part of me knew that running wouldn't help, that if I let my guard down, it would only draw closer. So I forced myself to keep my pace steady, every muscle tense, my senses sharp. I knew it was there, lurking, waiting for the moment I'd let myself falter. It was then that I heard something. A faint rustling, though there was no wind. My pulse quickened, the sound slithering over the field like a whisper. I stole another glance and saw it closer, just within the reach of sight, a half-formed thing shrouded in dark blurs and impossible bends. The limbs didn't align. Joints jutted out in angles that defied logic, its shape shifting with each flicker of my eyes. I kept walking, every step a battle against the urge to turn, to confront the thing outright. The thought crossed my mind that it was feeding on that glance, on that tiny moment of attention, but how could I avoid it? I could feel it closing in, each time closer, more defined. And then I felt the air shift, a sudden bone-deep cold that gnawed into my skin. I chanced a final glance back, and for the briefest of moments I saw it, unmistakable in the fading light. It loomed over the grass, its limbs impossibly long and crooked, its form barely visible, as though it were woven from the very shadows that danced around it. Its face, if you could even call it that, was a blur of dark hollows where eyes should be, staring back at me with an intensity that turned my blood to ice. Panic took over. I broke into a run, no longer caring if it would draw closer. The only thought in my head was to escape, to get away from that thing. The ground blurred beneath me, the rustle of weeds and the thunder of my own footsteps filling my ears. I didn't dare look back again, though I could feel it, an oppressive force growing closer with each step. The field stretched on longer than it ever had before, every stride feeling like it took me no farther. But somehow I reached the edge of the field, the old wooden fence barely holding itself together, marking the boundary between the overgrown wasteland and the road. I stumbled over it, collapsing on the other side, too afraid to look back, too exhausted to care if it was still there. When I finally dared to look, there was nothing. Just the empty field stretching back into shadow and silence, as if the thing had never been there at all. But that silence carried a heaviness, a lingering sense that the field still held something watching, waiting. I managed to pull myself up and stumbled the rest of the way home. The image of that twisted, shadowy figure burned into my mind. For days after, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, feeling its gaze in the darkness, half expecting to see that impossible shape lurking in the corners of my room. And even now, every so often when I pass that field, I can feel it. The weight of something watching from the shadows, waiting. I know it's still out there, biding its time, knowing I'll look away just long enough for it to draw near again. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey tonight. As you turn off the screen, just remember, sometimes the things that go bump in the night aren't so far away. If you enjoyed these tales, leave a like and share this video with someone who might love a Halloween scare. And for those brave enough, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because more stories are waiting to find you. Until next time, keep your lights low and your doors locked. Happy Halloween. If you're lucky,